Batman had already been taken seriously twice before 2022. Nolan grounded him in something close to the real world and walked away with the best superhero trilogy anyone had made up to that point. Then, one more studio pushed that same idea even further, turning him into an aging, guilt-soaked killer standing across from a god he wanted dead. That one split people down the middle the second it hit theaters, and people are still arguing about it. Then, The Batman came out. Went even darker, even heavier than either of those, and somehow became the version people can't stop talking about, like it rewrote the character from scratch. Most people who love this movie still can't tell you exactly why it worked, when the attempt right before it barely survived its own release. Hey, I'm Mac. Welcome to Mackinflix. Batman's been my favorite superhero, period, since before I can remember choosing him. I was reading the comics before I ever saw Christian Bale put the mask on. Hal Jordan's Green Lantern up there too. So are Nightwing and Green Arrow, and I genuinely wish either of those two got a real movie. But Batman was always the one. When The Dark Knight came out, he became the version everything after had to measure up to. Then, in 2022, I sat down for The Batman, and by the end of it, I was still in my seat trying to work out what I'd just watched. It felt like two of my favorite movies had put on a mask, Se7en, Zodiac. I love David Fincher's filmography because of exactly those two films, and watching Batman exist inside that genre, in that rain, in that grime, fit in a way I never once imagined he could. It took me a few rewatches to actually understand why, mechanically, any of that worked. Darker, more grounded, that's the label most people reach for. Snyder used both of those words too, right before it fell apart. So the real answer has to be something else. Going back through everything Reeves and Craig actually built this thing from, three things stand out. They pulled from comics almost nobody assumes this movie is using. They wrote a screenplay that treats Bruce Wayne like an actual psychology patient, not just a sad guy in a costume. And they built a structure tight enough to survive an audience that had already been burned once by the last attempt at this. That's the difference between telling the audience he's broken and actually building the case. Seeing exactly how deliberate that is means going back to everything that came before this movie first. Batman's worn a lot of faces before this one. Adam West made him camp. Burton made him gothic and a little sad underneath all that latex. Schumacher put him in a suit with rubber nipples and nearly killed the franchise for a decade doing it. Then Nolan happened, and everything changed. The Dark Knight is one of my favorite movies of all time, not just my favorite Batman movie. Nolan built it almost entirely practical, real IMAX cameras for the action sequences, years before any other blockbuster bothered to try that. An actual 18-wheeler truck flipped end over end on an actual street in Chicago, no green screen doing the heavy lifting. And then there's Heath Ledger. He locked himself away to build the Joker from nothing, and the performance is the kind actors still talk about like it rewired what a comic book villain could even be. He died a few months before the film came out, and that loss sat over the whole release in a way nobody could have planned for. When it hit theaters in the summer of 2008, it wasn't just successful, it became one of those rare comic book movies that critics who'd never touched the genre had to take seriously. Ledger won the Oscar for it, posthumously. The film is still on basically every list of the best superhero movies ever made, and for a lot of people my age, it's the reason we started taking this genre seriously at all. So when Warner Brothers decided to go even further than Nolan did, that's the shadow they were stepping into. Ben Affleck put the mask on next, older, angrier, 20 years into the job. And that's where things actually broke. Batman vs. Superman wanted to do something interesting with that idea. Take the character everyone had just watched Nolan make believable and push him even further into someone worn down by the job. This Bruce is 20 years into fighting crime and half convinced Superman is basically a god who could end humanity without even trying. That's a workable starting point for a character. The writers even gave him a real flaw to hang the story on. This Batman has started branding the criminals he catches, burning the bat symbol into their skin. Here's why that matters. Everyone in prison knows what that mark means. Branded criminals get killed by other inmates once they're inside. So every time Batman brands someone, he's not pulling a trigger himself, but he knows exactly what he's setting in motion. It's murder with extra steps, and the film knows he's aware of that. On paper, that's a dark, complicated choice for a character to make, and that choice matters. It means every time Batman crosses a line here, the question underneath it is whether he's still fighting crime, or just finding new ways to commit it. Then the movie undercuts its own idea almost immediately. Alfred does try to warn him, telling Bruce straight to his face that the anger and the feeling of powerlessness are turning him into something cruel. That's the one moment the film actually slows down to look at what the job is doing to this man. But right after that warning lands, Batman mounts a machine gun on the Batmobile and mows down henchmen by the dozen, crushes cars with people still inside, sets a guy on fire, and just walks away. Not once, repeatedly. All of that open, on-screen killing makes the earlier branding scene, the one moment that was actually trying to say something, feel pointless. If he's already gunning people down in broad daylight, the quieter, crueler idea of indirect killing never gets the chance to matter. That wrecks the whole climax, too. The entire back half builds toward whether Batman will cross the line and kill Superman. He's already crossed every line that mattered an hour earlier. So when Superman gasps out Martha, his mother's name, and Batman suddenly stops, the film wants that to feel like humanity breaking through the rage. What it actually feels like is a technicality. You can't redeem a man from a fall he's already taken. There's a deeper problem underneath all of that too, and it goes straight at what actually makes Batman worth watching in the first place. At his best, Batman is a genius who beats people far stronger than him using his mind, the kind of character who talks his way out of a room, or sets a trap 3 steps ahead of everyone in it. Across this whole era of the character, you'd be hard-pressed to find a single moment where he actually outsmarts anyone. He's physically dominant, and the film clearly loves shooting him that way, but the cleverness, the detective instinct, the thing that separates him from every other guy in a cape, barely shows up. Batman and Robin never even got far enough to ask that question in the first place. Warner Brothers wanted a movie built around what could go on a toy shelf, and George Clooney has said openly there was barely a character on the page for him to play. No arc, no internal war, just a man in rubber standing next to neon and puns. Every one of these versions proves the same thing from a different angle. Making this character feel broken and dark and dangerous is genuinely difficult to pull off. The real trick was always giving the audience a reason to believe the psychology underneath the darkness was real, and letting the character actually think his way through something before you ask anyone to feel it. Going darker on its own was never enough. There was almost a third example to add to that list, a whole different Batman movie that never made it to theaters at all. Before any of what actually released, there was a completely different Batman movie already in motion. Ben Affleck was set to write, direct, and star, working alongside Geoff Johns on a script built around Deathstroke hunting Batman out of revenge for his son's death, tearing Bruce Wayne's life apart from the inside like, in Joe Manganiello's own words, a horror movie villain. Manganiello has talked about the tone directly, comparing it to David Fincher's The Game and Frank Miller's Daredevil Born Again. Most of it took place inside Arkham Asylum, building toward a breakout designed to exhaust Batman before one final street war. Manganiello's Deathstroke had real motive behind him too. In this version, he blamed Batman directly for his own son's death, and the goal was dismantling Bruce Wayne's entire life, public and private. The way Manganiello put it, like a horror movie villain, or a shark that never stops moving. That's a strong premise sitting right there on the page. Cinematographer Robert Richardson, attached to shoot it at the time, described the whole script as built around one word: insanity. That's a fair description of where the DCEU was creatively by that point too. Every film in that universe was carrying weight from 3 other films at once, and Affleck's script had to somehow serve all of it while still being his own story. The script also wove in Robin's death, a thread Batman vs. Superman had already hinted at without paying off, and wrote Batgirl in as an ally alongside him. Zack Snyder even filmed a Justice League post-credit scene built purely to set this film up. Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor revealing Batman's secret identity to Deathstroke inside a prison cell. It never made the theatrical cut. Warner Brothers swapped it for something else entirely once the whole plan started falling apart around it. Then Affleck's life came apart around it. The Justice League shoot, made worse by studio interference, reshoots, and Zack Snyder losing his daughter partway through, took a toll Affleck has spoken about since. He was drinking through a divorce at the same time. A friend read the finished script and told him plainly he thought it was good, and that he'd drink himself to death if he went through what Justice League had put him through all over again. Affleck stepped down from directing in January 2017, and left the role entirely 2 years later. Warner Brothers shortlisted names like Ridley Scott and Denis Villeneuve, before Matt Reeves, a lifelong Batman fan going back to childhood, took the meeting. Reeves read the Affleck script and felt no connection to it. What he wanted was something that would rock Batman to his core, and he told the studio he'd only take the job with full creative control. Warner Brothers gave it to him, and even paused production so he could finish War for the Planet of the Apes first. Reeves briefly considered keeping it inside the DCEU, maybe as a prequel set in the 90s with a younger actor playing Affleck's Bruce Wayne. He dropped that within weeks. Servicing a shared universe was never going to let him build the character-first story he actually wanted, so he pulled the film out entirely, into a standalone continuity people on the production started calling Earth 2. Robert Pattinson landed the role in 2019, and I'll be honest, my own opinion of him didn't come from Batman at all. I watched him in Harry Potter and it barely registered. Twilight, I actively tried not to remember. But somewhere after Twilight, he started doing genuinely great indie work. Good Time, High Life, performances that convinced me he could do more than anyone was giving him credit for. So when the casting news hit and half the internet lost it, I wasn't worried. Then that first teaser dropped. Him stepping out of the dark to beat down a mugger and growl, "I'm vengeance." And whatever doubt was left in other people's minds mostly evaporated in that one shot. The two versions of this movie couldn't be further apart. One was designed to exhaust a hero across an interconnected franchise. The other was designed to break one man down to something honest, alone, with nobody else's continuity to answer to. And breaking him down that honestly meant reaching for material almost nobody else had touched. Most people assume this version leans on Frank Miller Year One or The Dark Knight Returns, since that's where almost every serious Batman adaptation goes. The real blueprint sits somewhere else entirely. I actually went out and bought Batman Earth 1 a while back after seeing it mentioned in enough comment sections that I wanted to check for myself instead of just repeating what other people were saying online. And once you've actually read it, the influence is obvious. The DNA underneath this movie comes from Jeff Johns and Gary Frank's book, which reimagines Bruce as young, angry, and genuinely bad at this. Pattinson's Batman crashes into a bridge, misjudging his own flight path. He stalls his own getaway vehicle. He walks in loud because stealth isn't something he's mastered yet. That clumsiness is the point. Earth 1 goes further than giving him bad instincts. It rewrites Martha Wayne's family entirely, out of the wealthy Kane line and into the Arkham family, carrying a documented history of severe mental illness. The film keeps that swap. Martha spent time in and out of psychiatric care after watching her own mother commit murder-suicide, and the script never resolves whether Bruce becoming this is a mission or a symptom. That choice carries weight. It means every time Batman crosses a line, the question sitting underneath it is whether he's fighting for Gotham or just proving the bloodline right. It also explains why he's so bad socially. The awkward silences, the total inability to keep up the old billionaire charm even for a few minutes at a time. A family history he's terrified is finally catching up with him. Bruce frames the beatings, the fear, all of it as his family's legacy, something inherited and owed. That's rationalization doing its job, dressing up an obsession as an inheritance so he never has to sit with what's actually underneath it. A much simpler and much scarier fear that none of this means anything at all. It's the same trick that keeps most obsessions alive. Give the compulsion a noble reason, and you never have to ask whether it was ever noble to begin with. Thomas Wayne doesn't survive this rewrite as a saint either. The Riddler leaks that Thomas, mid-mayoral run, went to Carmine Falcone to silence a journalist about to expose Martha's history, and that journalist ended up dead. Alfred later explains Thomas never wanted a killing, that it came from desperation to protect his wife, not malice. It doesn't undo the fact that his father compromised, and a man died for it. Bruce can't keep operating off a myth about two perfect people anymore. He has to actually choose to be something, instead of just avenging something. The other book doing the heavy lifting here is Darwin Cook's Ego, where Bruce, exhausted and grieving, confronts a literal monstrous version of Batman inside his own head. Reeves has named this one directly as a reference point, and once you know it's there, the whole film clicks into place through a much older idea than the comic itself. Freud's model of the mind, split into three competing parts. The id is the animal part, the piece of you that just wants what it wants right now, with zero patience and zero filter. The superego is the opposite, the strict inner rulebook telling you what's actually right and wrong. And the ego is stuck in the middle, trying to satisfy the id without breaking the superego's rules, constantly negotiating between the two. Run this film through that lens, and it maps almost perfectly. The id is the raw drive behind "I'm vengeance," the same mantra Batman whispers before every beatdown. Pure want with no patience, doing exactly what an id does, acting first, rationalizing after. The superego is the one rule that never bends no matter how far the rage goes. No killing. Inherited straight from a father who took an oath as a physician to do no harm. Everything in between is the ego, and it's fighting hardest with Selina Kyle. When Bruce accuses her of being a thief, she doesn't argue the point, she reframes it. "I'm not a thief. I'm a survivor." He tells her she doesn't have to do this, and that's the ego trying to mediate between raw judgment and something closer to actual understanding, in real time, in the middle of a conversation. The comics gave the film its psychology. The films it was actually shot like gave it everything else. Manganiello described that scrapped Affleck script as channeling David Fincher's The Game. Watching what Reeves actually built, the Fincher references are still there, just pointed at two completely different films this time: Se7en and Zodiac, both about men chasing killers who leave clues behind and never quite get caught doing it. Se7en and Zodiac are two of my favorite movies, full stop, and part of what got me into loving David Fincher's whole filmography in the first place. Watching this Riddler operate, targeting officials, leaving ciphers, eventually surrendering just so he can watch his plan finish from a jail cell, that's John Doe's entire playbook. The constant rain soaking every frame of Gotham is doing the same job the rain does in Se7en, making the whole city feel like it's actively rotting. And visually, this Riddler in the tactical gear and the hood with the crosshair pattern isn't cosplay of the comic Riddler at all. That's a direct pull from how the actual Zodiac killer presented himself. That framework forces Batman to actually work like a detective instead of just a fighter. The film is full of small procedural beats that never would have fit an action-first version of this character. Analyzing crime scene photographs frame by frame, wearing specialized contact lenses that record evidence as he moves through a scene, sitting with a cipher until the pattern actually gives something up, working informants instead of just beating information out of them. None of it looks flashy on screen, and that's exactly why it works. A detective doesn't need a cool gadget to be a good detective. He needs patience, and this version of Batman has more of that sitting under the cape than any version before him. Chinatown gave the film its institutional rot. The Renewal Fund, Thomas Wayne's charity that got hijacked by the mob and corrupt politicians laundering money through it, works exactly like the land and water conspiracies running underneath Chinatown. This corruption runs all the way to the top of the city. Clute gave the film its Selina Kyle. That's a 1971 thriller about a straight-laced detective who gets tangled up with her while investigating a disappearance, and the shape of it maps almost perfectly onto Batman and Selina hunting down her missing roommate together. That's a handful of films doing very different work inside one script, and none of them are fighting each other for space. Each one solves a problem this story actually needed solved. And once you notice that, it stops feeling like a checklist of favorite directors, and starts feeling like a filmmaker who already knew exactly what he was missing before he went looking for it. Then there's Taxi Driver, which does the most work of any of them. Bruce keeps a handwritten journal and narrates from it, and that device comes straight from Travis Bickle's own diary voiceover, an isolated man cataloging his disgust with a city he can't stop watching. The script even frames what Bruce is doing as a criminological experiment, which is basically Bickle's obsessive vigilantism relocated from a cab to a cave. Each one is solving a real problem, the kind the Affleck script never got around to solving. How you make a psychologically damaged rich kid in a bat costume feel like he belongs inside a real, grimy, paranoid city instead of just standing on top of it. Which raises the obvious question: if the city is doing this much work, what exactly is left of the man underneath the mask? Every previous Batman kept two people running side by side, the billionaire playboy by day, the vigilante by night. And the theory was always that the playboy was the mask, Batman was the real one underneath. This version doesn't bother keeping the mask up at all. Bruce Wayne has basically forgotten how to be him. Reeves has said directly that he modeled this Bruce on Kurt Cobain, after spending pre-production listening to Something in the Way on loop. It shows. Pattinson plays him as a reclusive insomniac who's stopped washing his hair, who smears the makeup around his eyes into something closer to a bruise every time he pulls the mask off, who's let Wayne Enterprises rot because the money only matters to him as fuel for the thing he actually cares about. There's barely a Bruce Wayne left underneath the mask to hide anything in anymore. Wayne Enterprises barely exists to him either. He's neglected the actual philanthropic responsibility that name is supposed to carry, and treats his own fortune as nothing more than fuel for the war he's actually fighting at night. Every previous Bruce Wayne used that money to build gadgets, fund good publicity, or at minimum keep up appearances. This one just burns it. He barely sleeps either, and it shows in every scene before the mask even goes on. This is a man who let one of his two lives die and never noticed. Even his voice changes depending on which version of himself is talking. Bruce Wayne barely speaks above a mumble in public. Batman growls every word like it costs him something to say out loud. And the thing driving all of it, the mantra he actually whispers before every fight, is "I'm vengeance." The subway scene is where the film makes you feel exactly what that costs. Batman comes out of the dark and beats a gang member half to death, and the man he just rescued doesn't thank him. He cowers, begging Batman not to hurt him too. That's the whole flaw in one image. His methods aren't reading as safety to the people he's protecting. They're reading as the exact same fear the criminals were already putting into the city. Even the camera is telling you this. Cinematographer Greg Fraser had a custom set of lenses built and then deliberately detuned them, keeping the exact center of every frame razor sharp while the edges fall apart into distortion and soft blur. That's tunnel vision built directly into the hardware. Bruce is so locked on to whatever's directly in front of him that everything else, the bystanders, the wider damage, the actual scale of what's happening around him, goes soft and unreadable at the edges of his own vision. The camera is diagnosing him before a single line of dialogue does it for you. He doesn't fight like a master either, and that's deliberate. He walks straight into gunfire like the pain barely registers, absorbs hits that should put anyone else down, and throws himself into every brawl like strategy never occurred to him. It reads less like discipline and more like a man who might not entirely mind getting hurt. The Batmobile chase against the Penguin takes that same idea and puts it on wheels. Reeves has cited Stephen King's Christine as a direct inspiration for how that car moves, and once you know that, the chase stops looking like a cool set piece and starts looking like a monster loose on the highway, which is exactly how the film wants you to read Batman's own obsession in that moment. The film is building the case against him, one scene at a time, so that when he finally has to change, you understand precisely what he's changing away from. And proving a case like that takes real detective work, not just a costume. Quick one, if you're enjoying this, a subscribe genuinely helps. The plot mechanics underneath all of this come from 3 more books. Jeff Loeb's The Long Halloween hands over Selina as Carmine Falcone's illegitimate daughter, tying her personal stakes directly into the same conspiracy Batman's chasing. Frank Miller's Year One supplies the corrupt GCPD and Falcone running the city like it's actual government. And Scott Snyder's 0 Year gives the third act its flood, a problem Batman genuinely cannot punch his way out of. Reeves also set the whole film in Year 2 of Bruce's career, which means the script never has to spend a single scene on an origin story. No pearl necklace hitting the pavement in an alley, no training montage. Batman is already an established, still deeply distrusted figure the moment the film opens, which frees up a nearly 3-hour runtime to actually function as a real investigation, instead of an extended introduction. None of that density came easy either. Principal photography started in January 2020, got shut down within 2 months when the pandemic hit, and didn't wrap until March 2021 in Chicago, after a positive COVID test inside the production forced another 2-week halt in the middle of a UK lockdown. The release date moved 3 separate times before landing on March 2022. A 3-hour detective story got built inside conditions that would have sunk almost anything simpler. That investigation starts with the murder of Mayor Mitchell, found with a card addressed directly to the Batman. And from there, the film moves the way an actual mystery moves. A crime scene, a first cipher Batman has to decode instead of just punch through, Selina Kyle pulling him into the Iceberg Lounge, and the criminal underworld underneath the city he thought he already understood. The midpoint is where the investigation turns on Batman himself. Chasing a killer stops being the point once Thomas Wayne's own ties to Falcone come out in public, and the case Batman's been building against someone else suddenly implicates his own family. Then Alfred takes a bomb meant for Bruce and nearly doesn't survive it, and for the first time in the whole film, the emotional armor actually cracks. The man underneath it sits in a hospital chair instead of already back out working the case, finally facing what it would cost him to lose the one relationship he's spent 2 films pretending he didn't need. Gordon carries a lot of that investigation with him, and it's worth noticing what the script does with his rank. He's a lieutenant here, not the commissioner every other version hands him automatically, which keeps him embedded inside a department that mostly wants Batman gone. Reeves has compared their partnership directly to Woodward and Bernstein, 2 people digging through the same rot from different sides of the law, the only 2 in the entire film who actually trust each other. Gordon's the one person in this whole investigation who never turns into a mirror for Bruce. Almost everyone else in his life does. The film tells you they're the same before either of them says a word. It opens on a shaky, heavy-breathing point of view, shot through a pair of binoculars, watching the mayor's family, and every instinct trained by every previous Batman movie assumes that's Batman doing the watching. It's the Riddler. Minutes later, Batman does his own surveillance, contact lenses recording and scanning faces in real time, the exact same camera language pointed at the exact same city. 2 men, 2 masks, watching the same corrupt streets through the same lens. Edward Nashton and Bruce Wayne are the same wound, wearing 2 different net worths. both orphaned by what this city actually is underneath the skyline. Both isolated, obsessive, running a private crusade against corruption while keeping it documented in a journal nobody else reads. Both convinced that fear is the tool that finally makes people listen. The difference is what happened after they lost everything. Bruce went back to a manor, a fortune, and Alfred. Nashton went to an orphanage the Wayne family's own renewal fund was supposed to protect, and watched that fund get looted by the very corruption Batman spent the whole film chasing. The murder weapon proves the connection runs deeper than a shared backstory. Nashton kills the mayor with an ordinary carpet tucker, and later, investigating the orphanage itself, Batman finds the exact same tool sitting there, tying the present-day murder directly back to the childhood that produced it. When Bruce finally interrogates him in Arkham, Nashton acts like a partner, genuinely proud, like the two of them have been running the same operation the entire time. That's the moment Bruce has to actually sit with the idea that his own approach, the fear, the theatrics, the war on an entire city instead of individual criminals, is exactly what built the man across the table from him. Nashton copied every bit of this playbook from him. His followers are ordinary people, radicalized through the same kind of online echo chamber that radicalizes people in the actual world, recruited by a manifesto instead of a mask. An audience willing to believe you was always the only requirement for becoming dangerous. Alfred gets far less credit for carrying his half of this than he deserves. Every other version of this relationship plays Alfred as the wise, patient conqueror Bruce leans on. Here, Bruce barely tolerates him, keeps him at arm's length, treats him more like tactical support than family. Because letting Alfred actually parent him would mean admitting there's still a person underneath the mask worth parenting. It's the same isolation running through everything else in this film, just aimed at the one man who's never left. Seeing him hooked up to machines, actually at risk of not waking up, is what finally cracks something open. Bruce doesn't say much in that scene. He doesn't need to. The fact that he's there at all, sitting in a hospital chair instead of already back out working the case, tells you everything about what just shifted. Selina Kyle is the one who actually gets under Bruce's rigid sense of right and wrong. He starts out seeing every criminal in Gotham as equally guilty, full stop. Selina's stealing to survive, and to protect a roommate she can't afford to lose. And every time Bruce tries to lecture her about it, the film makes him look less like a hero, and more like a man who's never once had to choose between rent and doing the right thing. Kravitz has described the two of them as drawn together by wanting to protect the vulnerable, just from completely opposite sides of privilege. She's there to make him actually see the city he thinks he already understands. Every one of those relationships gets filtered back through the one place Bruce actually tells the truth: a journal nobody else reads. The film opens and closes on the exact same device. Bruce's own handwritten journal, read out loud in voiceover, and the gap between what he says in the first one and what he says in the last one. It's an old device, journal narration dressed up as noir shorthand, and the film uses it carefully, never to explain what you're already watching. It only shows up to tell you what Bruce actually believes underneath everything else happening on screen, which is the one thing the camera alone can't give you. The opening entry is bleak on purpose. He describes the city like an open wound, calls himself a nocturnal predator, and says the line that basically becomes his whole personality for the next 2.5 hours. "They think I'm hiding in the shadows, but I am the shadows." That's a man who's decided fear alone is enough to fix a broken city. And the film spends the rest of its runtime proving him wrong. The closing entry comes right after the flood, right after he's had to physically save people instead of punish them, and the tone has completely changed. "Vengeance won't change the past, mine or anyone else's. I have to become more. People need hope." A choice ended that sentence for him. Same format, same device, completely different man narrating it. The first journal entry belongs to someone talking only to himself in the dark, convinced isolation is strength. The second belongs to someone finally speaking outward, toward a city he's decided is worth saving instead of just punishing. Whatever changes him between those two entries happens in a flooded arena, and it starts with 4 words coming back at him from a stranger. Everything the film has been building finally collides in the flooded arena during the Riddler's last act of terrorism. That man's radicalized followers are closing in on the newly elected mayor, and in the middle of taking one of them down, Gordon rips off the man's mask and asks who he is. And the masked man looks straight at Batman and says the exact words Batman opened the film with: "I'm vengeance." That's the whole thesis of the movie landing in 4 words. Batman's own mantra, handed back to him by a total stranger who picked it up secondhand and used it to justify hurting people. All this time, he's been teaching Gotham's fear to spread. There's a word for what the Riddler actually did to Batman, even if the film never says it out loud. He copied the method without ever being taught it directly, just from watching. The same way violence spreads through a city when nobody stops to ask where it actually started. Batman built a myth meant to scare criminals straight. Instead, he built a manual, and somebody else read it more literally than he ever intended anyone to. Right before any of what happens next, Batman is on the ground, overwhelmed, and he reaches into his belt for a vial of glowing green liquid and injects himself with it. Whatever it actually is, adrenaline officially, something closer to the comic's Venom if you're reading the color choice literally, the effect on screen is identical either way. He goes berserk, beating the man in front of him well past the point of necessity until Gordon has to physically drag him off. That's the addiction talking. One last hit of the exact thing this whole film has been building a case against, right before the one choice that actually changes him. What he does immediately after is the actual answer to that realization. Citizens are trapped in the flooding, and instead of chasing down the rest of the Riddler's followers, Batman cuts a live wire to save them, takes a shock that should kill him, and goes under the water. Reeves has talked about that plunge explicitly as a baptism, and it plays like one. He comes back up, lights a flare, and holds his hand out to help a stranger climb out of the wreckage. That's the whole arc compressed into one physical gesture. For the entire runtime, Batman has been something that emerges from the dark to make people afraid. In this shot, for the first time, he's the thing leading people out of the dark instead. Same man, same suit, completely different function. Nashton doesn't get a rematch. He doesn't need one. His entire war was already answered the second Batman chose saving strangers over punishing them. The one move Nashton's version of vengeance was never built to make. Batman becomes more than the thing Nashton copied, by refusing to keep being the man Nashton learned from in the first place. Every other Batman before this one already knew who he was by the time the story started. Keaton knew, Bale knew, even Affleck's version, tired and jaded as he was, had decades of certainty behind him. This one didn't know anything. He had a mantra, a mask, and a bloodline he wasn't sure he could trust, and the entire film is the process of him figuring out the difference between being feared and actually being useful. What makes that work is how much the screenplay actually earns it. It pulled from the one corner of the comics almost nobody else was adapting. It ran a real psychological framework underneath the costume instead of just gesturing at trauma. It built a mystery dense enough that solving it takes the same patience and attention Batman himself has to use. Every piece of that, the comics, the psychology, the mirrors standing across from him, the shape of the mystery itself, is doing actual work toward the same argument, scene by scene, until broken stops being something the movie tells you, and starts being something you've watched happen with your own eyes. The patience is what actually separates it, the same patience it asks Batman himself to have. The willingness to build an argument instead of just declaring one. Plenty of Batman movies have reached for serious and dark before this one, Snyder's included, and come up empty anyway. He rises out of that flooded arena holding a flare he lit himself. Small, ordinary, the kind of thing anyone could grab off a shelf on their way out the door. Held up by a man who spent the whole film learning the only thing worth being afraid of anymore was himself. Thanks for watching. If you want more breakdowns like this one, that's basically the whole channel. Go dig through it. There's more waiting for you here.